Hello, good morning, Sitaram, and welcome to another program in the series, Addiction and Recovery. I'm your host, Ramnaresh Dwarika, and I'd like to welcome all of our brothers and sisters in Trinidad and Tobago, up the Caribbean, and worldwide. All of those people who have been following the program, I want to thank them for their comments and suggestions and their support. And to let you know, this program is being recorded and it will be posted on YouTube and Facebook soon after its completion this morning. It will also be repeated on radio and TV Jagriti at 10 p.m. tonight. So those of you who are unable to stay for the entire program this morning, you can always come back and listen to it later on, or you can access it on YouTube. And more so, you can use these programs. All the programs I have been doing for the last few years are posted on my YouTube channel. That is Ramnaresh Dwarika, Addiction and Recovery on YouTube or Facebook. And also on the radio station's Facebook channel, you can access these programs and you can also send it as a link to someone who you believe could benefit from what we are talking about. And this morning, I have a very important program. As usual, this morning I want to speak about how can family members help the addicted person recover? How family members can create an environment and the support system that can help one of their own recover from drug addiction. Now, addiction is often called a family disease, and that is for good reason. Because although the person drinking or using drugs may suffer the immediate effects of the drug, the family members around them, sometimes they suffer even more because the alcoholic or the drug abuser can always escape and use the drug to help them to cope with the chaos they have created. But the family members do not have that facility and they have to deal with it on a clear mind. And the shame and the guilt and the frustrations and the disappointment and all those emotions that go along with this, they are affected by it and they respond and react by eventually becoming very pathological. Sometimes the entire family turns around and scapegoats the drug abuser. At the same time, by doing that, they're not even looking at how they might be contributing to the problem. So we're going to be talking about all of that. First, though, is the family need to understand how the drug is affecting the person and how it is by extension affecting them. It affects mothers, fathers, spouses, children, siblings, and even close friends are affected. This alcoholism and drug addiction is a disease that even enters the workplace and can have very far-reaching effects. So that organizations like Alcoholics Anonymous, they recognize this from very, very early. And alongside Alcoholics Anonymous groups and the 12-step program, they have what you call Al-Anon family groups. That is to help the family members to not only understand what has happened with their loved one, but also more so to understand what has happened with them as a result. So that this reminds us that while the addict must take responsibility for his recovery, the family also has to recover. Otherwise, it's like, you had a fish in an aquarium and the fish became sick because of the conditions in the aquarium. But if you take them out and you treat them for their condition, but you throw them back into that same aquarium, they're going to get back sick again. So it is very important that the family is involved in the process. So today, I want to discuss the following points. One is understanding addiction as an illness, because far too often I have family members who do not understand that this is an illness just like diabetes, just like hypertension, and all of the rest. And while we accord sympathy and understanding for the other illnesses, because this is a self or seen as a self-inflicted illness, family members, they do not have much tolerance for it. And they tend to scapegoat and blame and shame and guilt the person. I'm also going to talk about what helps recovery, and by extension, what hinders it or what makes things worse. Sometimes family members and people around, if they do not understand with all the good intention, they can be fostering the problem without realizing it. Because this is a disease where kindness could literally kill the patient. So, sorry about this. Yes, hello. I'm sorry, you're having a little technical difficulty here. So let's see if we can do this again. Yes. And what are healthy boundaries? Because there must be boundaries to any relationship, whether it's contractual, business, or family. Also, supporting without enabling. You want to support the person, you want to help them to recover, but you do not want to enable them to continue to be sick. And that's a very important point that I will expand on later on. Self-care for the family is also going to be discussed, and the hope for long-term healing. I know this is very important to family members because over time, the family loses trust in the person and vice versa. So first, understanding the addiction. Because if you're going to be working with a problem, you need to understand what you're dealing with if you are going to be really able to deal with it effectively. So before families can help, they must understand what addiction is. Addiction is one, a chronic brain disease. So while a person might have been genetically predisposed, it may not be their fault, I mean, altogether, that they have become addicted. It is now accepted as a disease by the World Health Organization, by the Pan American Health Organization, indeed by our own government here and our own Ministry of Health, accept that alcoholism is a disease. It is listed in the diagnostic statistical manual that is used in making diagnosis in medicine as a disease. Addiction is also characterized by compulsive use. That is, the person don't seem to have control. It become compulsive for them to use drugs. And I know people around them have difficulty understanding that nobody held you down. I've heard that remark, nobody held you down and poured a drink down your throat. You went for yourself and you got it. And you could have made another choice, or so it appears. And what is more baffling is, why would a person continue to use despite the consequences, the obvious consequences? You lost your job. You got charged by the police. You got into a fight and you have injuries and scars that arose out of that incident that is so visible. Your broken arm or a leg, you're still in cast, and yet you're heading for that drink. So that this is a disease that is characterized by complete loss of control. It is not simply a lack of willpower. And that is the mantra that a lot of people have. It's just a question of willpower, so they think. However, addiction does not remove the responsibility. Recovery requires accountability. So while it is not your fault, you may not have the willpower to do it. It may not have, you have inherited this predisposition. In spite of all of that, once you are aware that you have lost control, that you are now a compulsive user, it becomes your responsibility to do something about it. And while you alone cannot do it, you have to seek and get help. So families often, you know, they blame themselves. They feel ashamed because sometimes the addiction cannot be covered up in spite of all their efforts. There is they try to control the addict. The unfortunate thing is that the addict has lost control over the substance that they're using. But because of that, the family members have lost control over the addict as well. And he's or she is addicted to the drug, but they are addicted to him or her because of their love and affection and the relationship. So the drug is not only affecting the addict, but by extension affecting the entire family and sometimes even people outside of the family, the extended family and the workplace and all of that. So that a lot of families resort to covering up the problem because of the shame that they feel, the embarrassment that they feel. They try as much as possible to cover up, but recovery will only begin with understanding, and in isolation, addiction progresses. The more you cover up, is the less likely you are able to do anything about the problem at all. So that the addict themselves is in denial, and his or her family is also in denial because they're trying to protect the family from shame, from the environment and the people around and all of that. So that I want to let family members know. I know especially mothers. I've heard while working at Cora, I've heard all kinds of little stories where mothers and family members try to explain. A mother said this boy was a good child until he fell from a tree and hit his head. And since then, he has become like this. He has become dependent on drugs. Or I've heard mothers say, he was a good boy until he got married to that girl. She's the cause. And vice versa. I've heard the addict and alcoholic say, you see, my parents treated my brothers and everybody special and better. They got to go to school and they were sent abroad to study, but I was not given, not realizing that you yourself, because of your drug use, you neglected the opportunities that were available to you and so on, but choose to rather blame other people. So that I want to say to family members, you did not cause this. You understand? There's nothing you could have done that directly caused this. However, without realizing it, we may have created an environment that facilitated it, but we are not directly the cause of it. And as a result, you cannot control it either. While you are not the cause, you cannot control it, and you cannot cure it. A lot of family members I know, when I worked as director at Piparo, they would say, look, just take this person and keep them there and fix them so that when they come back, they'll be like how they used to be before. No, that is not possible. They may even get better than before, but by their own efforts. And by the end of this program, hopefully we will all understand why. Now, while we didn't cause it, while we can't control it or cure it, but we can contribute to recovery. And that is what today's program is about. How you can contribute to recovery of that person that you care about and you love. So, what helps in recovery? Let's talk about the positives first. what are those things that we can do that could help the person who is in recovery? And one is need to encourage them. We need to encourage them to make sure they complete their detox programs, whether they're doing it as an inpatient or as an outpatient. And as I say this, yes, a lot of people sometimes, people like in the helping profession like myself would have to make an evaluation. If you went to Cora or you went to any treatment facility, they will have to do an evaluation first to establish whether you really have a bona fide drug problem, whether you're a social drinker or you're an alcoholic. Having decided that, we'll have to choose the best stream of or kind of program that best suit you. And I've spoken about that in a previous program, about two programs ago. I spoke about what are those critical elements that you look for when you are selecting a program for yourself or someone you love. So there are programs that have a built-in detox, like at Cora we had, for alcoholics. But there are programs where you may have to do the detox at another place and then be transferred to a follow-up program, a rehab program. And in Trinidad, the St. Anne's Hospital has been used basically for detox as well. So that we also need to encourage the person to go into rehabilitation, whether it be inpatient or outpatient. Now, inpatient has its advantage in that the person is taken away from that milieu, that environment where the drug is available. So, as a matter of, well, having no option, they have no option but to stay drug free because they can't get it. Like I know some treatment facilities, the perimeter is so high you can't climb the fence. And the places, they have security set up, cameras and all of that to monitor so you can't leave or hide. And even relatives who bring and friends who bring, items for the person in recovery, these items are screened and searched to see if there's drugs hidden in it, cigarettes and all of that. So that the advantage is that gives a sanctuary effect where you are safe in a safe place and it gives you a head start. If you really have a desire to stop, it can be a useful arrangement where, because in the first few days of recovery, most alcoholics and drug addicts go through severe withdrawal, which could cause the craving. And I've seen a lot of people trying to make it on the outside. They're well motivated and all of that, but because they can't deal with the withdrawal symptoms and the availability of the drug of their choices is there, that they keep relapsing. So in cases like that, sometimes one has to make the decision to have that person be transferred into inpatient care. However, I say that with a word of caution because a lot of people, treatment facilities, have now been accused of producing what it calls pajama sobriety. That is to say, while the person is in the pajamas, while they're in the treatment facility, they stay clean. But as soon as they come back outside and where the drug is available, they seem to relapse. And that so that the people who make it on the outside without having to be put in a restricted rehab center, those who do it as outpatients seem to have a more solid and long-lasting sobriety. So there's the advantages and disadvantages. However, they need to be encouraged to attend their sessions. I've had so many young people, very promising, but doing well. And sometimes, yes, because of affordability, and sometimes people take it for granted, not understanding this disease. After a week or two of staying sober, the uninformed family says, well, no, I think you can make it now, And they take over the role of supervision and all of that. But remember, the drinking is only a symptom of the disease. There were other issues, the inability to resolve conflict, the inability to deal with withdrawal symptoms like insomnia, irritability, depression, anxiety. All of these things can follow in the days or weeks after a person stops using drugs. And these could easily lead back to the person to relapse. They also need to get into some kind of follow-up program, especially 12-step programs. 12-step programs were designed to, especially to deal with drug addiction. And this is why they are so much more successful, to the extent where a lot of treatment facilities now are using the 12-step program in their outpatient and follow-up programs. And then they also have to keep their medical and psychiatric appointments and have evaluations done, because there's something called comorbidity. A lot of alcoholics and drug addicts not only suffer with the addiction, but they may have had underlying psychiatric problems that led them to use in the first place, or has been generated because of their drug use. So those have to be dealt with, otherwise the person's recovery will be precarious. So their health issues need to be attended, because a person who is using drugs very often neglect their health, personal hygiene. Especially for cocaine addicts, a lot of them suffer dental problems and so on. Sorry. And treatment must be presented as a health issue. It must be seen by the family members and the alcoholic or drug addict as a health issue. And it is not a punishment when you have to go to treatment or counseling and all of that. We are not sending you to rehab to punish you for being truant or deviant or all of that. You understand? Family members especially need to avoid shaming the person. I know a lot of families, they use that shame and guilt to embarrass the person, and hoping that would produce the determination in them to do something about the drug addiction. And that is really a difficult thing for both sides, because a lot of people, you are feeling ashamed now, you're feeling guilty in the community. He's going on stealing people things, getting himself into fights and misbehaving in public. And how do you deal with that? A lot of family members become very angry, and they ventilate by shaming the person, or even threatening. The alcoholic or drug addict spouses threaten, I will leave you if you go back and drink, or you can come home and you misbehave like that, or I will put you out of the house, because you're causing, shame and embarrassment to them in public. And family members need to avoid public embarrassment as well of the person. Do not scapegoat them, because some of these things people can really not recover from. They always remember, and they have to go back and live in that society. And, we our personality is based on what we present to other people, what we'd like them to see. And if the people around us keep eroding our personality, shaming us, you know, publicly embarrassing us and so on, in the hope that, we would change and to really ventilate their own anger, that can have very, very long lasting effects on the person. That even though they stop, they having to deal with the shame and all of that could generate so much guilt that could cause them to want to go back, and a lot of people end up using drugs to help them to cope with these extremes of emotions. And this is why sometimes alcoholism and drug addiction is described as an emotional illness. People are said to be emotionally ill because they're not handling feelings very well. And I don't only want to caution family members and, chastise you, but instead, we can say, look, for instance, you can say to the person, look, we love you. We love you too much to watch you destroy yourself. You understand? Which really puts you on the same side with the alcoholic or drug addict, letting them know that, look, you are hurting as well because of what they are doing. They are hurting, but you understand that, but you are hurting as well because of your love for them. So, what family members really need to do is to create what is called a recovery environment, you know, and what people need in recovery. You see, let us look at when you are drinking or using drugs, you don't really have any structure in your life. We have a saying, Sunday could fall on Monday. You go to sleep when, especially with certain drugs, you're up all night and then you're sleeping all day. And you're not going to work, you lose your job, so you don't have structure in your life. Whereas you would have be getting up at 5 and you're getting ready and getting yourself dressed and getting your things together to head out there to get to work on time. All of these things keep you occupied, keep your mind off drug use and so on. But now when you don't have structure, for the guy who's living on the streets, he's just drinking to live and living to drink. When he wake up, he's obsessed with where to get that next hit or that next drink, and his whole life he's like on a merry-go-round now. Has have to use because he used yesterday, and will have to get more because of using today. So structure is critical in recovery for the person and for the family as well. You need to provide a stable environment, a safe environment. That is, you do not want to provide an environment that is very stressful on both sides. You don't quarrel with the person, and you don't encourage. They should not be encouraged to argue as well. This is why one of the mnemonics to help as a tip for people in recovery is the word halt. The H stands for hunger, the A stands for anger, the L for loneliness, and the T for tiredness. These are four things that people in recovery need to be aware of and to practice, so that there must be stability in the home. Even though the person is trying to stay sober, if there is a chaotic environment because you have other people fighting and quarreling, using drugs as well, that is not going to help. So that you want to reduce the chaos while the person is in recovery, and you can do this in several ways. I will talk about that as we go further. So families can help by keeping alcohol and drugs out of the home. That is very, very important, because if you don't have it, you can't use it. So that in recovery, even the addicts and the alcoholics, one of the first things you'd hear any helping professional telling them is that they need to stay away from people, places, and situations where the drug is available. Because once you have it, even though you have it locked up in the cupboard now, the alcoholic who is having trouble, let's suppose when a person stops using alcohol, they start to suffer with things like insomnia and depression and anxiety. And they lie down in their room and they can't go to sleep now. And their mind is making trip to the medicine cabinet, to the bar in the house that always is locked. And they will eventually find some way to get the drugs. You understand? And our alcoholics and drug addicts these days are very innovative. Pressed by that compulsion, they are going to, I have seen cocaine addicts develop, what we call in recovery circle prayers. That is, they will come up with stories that can even convince God that they need to get money. They will find so many innovative ways to get. I work at Cora Hospital, and people would bring cigarettes hidden in a sandwich. They find so many innovative ways to get drugs into the center or have people bring it to them. They will threaten the relatives. If you don't bring it for me, I'm going to walk out of the program. And the poor relatives want them to stay there, break the rules and hide the cigarettes and whatever and bring it for them. Because they too are just so happy not to have this addict in their face all day, embarrassing them in the community and all of that, just to get a reprieve from them. So keeping alcohol and drugs out of the home is critical. Also reducing conflict, even with the addict or alcoholic or with other members in the home. Sometimes, family members are divided on the issue, where mothers sometimes where they're enabling their sons and covering for them and hiding and although the father and the other family members might say, look, we can't give him, don't give him any money. Mother hides and slip. And I'm not only blaming mothers here. Fathers may also do that. Family members may slip a little money for him, feeling sorry, not understanding, this whole question of what is called tough love. What you can also do is support the person going to follow up and going to the AA meetings and so on. You can do that. You can, hey, aren't you supposed to be going to your meeting this evening? And even go with them sometimes. Because a lot of the AA meetings in Trinidad and Tobago, they are open meetings where family members can go. And encourage the person, into healthy routines now, especially in the initial stages of recovery. And I know family members who now spending a lot more time with their addicted relative, taking them out, going to the beach, visiting relatives and so on, organizing activities. I know we have just been to the carnival here, which was a difficult time. So that the AA family organized activities for its members in that they had marathon meetings at the Arangwes AA group. They had marathon meetings at the Central Intergroup Annex in Cuba. So that, what you can do is encourage your loved one to go to these meetings. Now, what make things worse? And I want family members to especially pay attention to this. Families can sometimes unknowingly support the addiction without realizing it. And this is called enabling. What enabling looks like: giving money, knowing it will buy drugs. The person is insisting, well, look, I'm not going to. I had a family member, some relatives brought this alcoholic to me not too long ago, and they're promising him, look, if you stop drinking, we'll buy a car for you. We'll do this, we'll do that, and so on. Well, let me say this: you can't bribe a person into recovery, because as soon as they get the reward, they will more than likely go back to using, because that is what they stayed sober for. So giving money to the person, a lot of addicts have told me that, look, when they see a $20 in their hand, they don't really see $20. They see two cocaine rocks. You understand? Money is one of those things that can cause, because it can easily be converted into the drug. So then again, enabling is when supervisors and foremen and so on lie to the employers, they cover up, they clock the person card in for them, although the person is not there, or they have them sit once, even supervisors, all right, boy, sit and cool off, and they put their name on the pay list, even though they didn't work or they wasn't working. We keep covering for them. And I know a particular person in my community who literally died because this enabled him to continue to drink, because he was getting the pay that supported his habit. And he was not going to work. He was drinking every day. But because another relative of him was in a position of influence, he never lost his job, but he eventually lost his life. This is a serious thing. Paying legal fees repeatedly. Okay, somebody made a mistake, and okay, you pay the lawyers, you have to get the bail, you pay the bondsman, and all of that. But you keep doing this repeatedly, and the person realize that they're not having to suffer the consequences of the behavior. They're always getting bailed out, and that is another way of enabling them to continue to use, covering up their behavior. Also does that. I've known wives who call the workplace and say, he's very sick today, or one of his relatives passed away. And I remember a joke about that, but we don't have time for the joke this morning. But covering up for the person's behavior is not going to help. You understand? But then I know it could be serious. Sometimes if you don't cover up for them, they can lose their reputation. That it can. So it has to be a balance. Something making excuses for them does not help either. So that all of these are enabling the removal of consequences is one sure way to have the person remain sick. Because without consequences, addiction continues. And I have said this several times in the past, and I'll repeat it again slowly. And that is, no alcoholic or drug addict is going to stop using drugs or alcohol unless to continue to use it becomes more painful than stopping. A person who has become dependent psychologically and physically on drugs and so on, when they stop, it is a painful experience because now they have to deal with the depression, the anxiety, the insomnia, the irritability, and all of those things without the drug. And that is not a pleasant experience. That is why I've been using acupuncture to help people with all those withdrawal symptoms. So, but if we do not make the consequences of use more painful than the withdrawal symptoms, a person is not going to choose to stop. So that if we keep enabling them and bailing them out and making excuses for them and all of that, they're not going to stop. So although you love someone, love must be firm. There's what you call tough love. Because alcoholism and drug addiction is a disease where kindness could literally kill the patient. You have to, while you love the person and you're doing what is right for the person, you have to be firm. And I will talk a little bit about that because you have to develop boundaries, a contract with the person, because that is boundaries usually is the turning point. Boundaries are not punishment. They are, you discuss with the person, you say, look, you know, this is if you continue to use, these would be the conditions. If you decide to stop, these are the things I could do for you. So that boundaries are really for the protection of yourself and the person. So I'll give you an example. You may want to say to the addict that you cannot live here if you keep using. Now, having set that boundary, you haven't put out the person yet, but you have to be able to stick with your side of the contract. Don't say it if you can't do it. Because you may want to say, look, we will not give you any money, or we will help you get treatment, but not support your addiction. And you make it very clear, and you must be convinced of that as well. Don't just say it because it sounds good. Boundaries must be clear. There must be calm. You don't make these arrangements when you're angry, upset, depressed yourself. They must be discussed or you may want to enlist the support of a professional where you draw up these boundaries. And it must be consistent. You can't renege on this because if you renege on this, inconsistent boundaries teach people to manipulate you. Because they will tell you, no, my mother, my father, not going to put me out of the house. They only say so. They just were angry and they said that. No, you have to, if you are, because at the end of the day, that's where they're going to end up, they're going to end up on the street or end up dead. So you might as well as fast track it and bring it up ahead and say, listen, if you if you want to stay here, like there's this old lady from South who called me once and said how her son was taking her pension money to support his addiction, and she was a widow and he was the only son in the house with her, and she was afraid of him. He would threaten physical violence, and he said he'll put her out and all kind of thing if she didn't give him the pension money to go and buy his drugs. He was pressured by his addiction. And I advised her to go to the police. And she went. They took him to the court, and he was made to sign an agreement with the judge where the boundaries were set, that he had to report once a week and he had to go for treatment and he had to go to AA meetings. And today he saved his life and he saved his relationship with his mother as well. So that is just one that is can happen if the family members understand the nature of the relationship in recovery. Now, consistency teaches responsibility. While inconsistent boundaries teach manipulation, consistency teaches responsibility. Family members must also, you know, adopt effective communication methods and skills with the person. And I'm saying that to say that you need to avoid lecturing down the person. People they've been hearing you since they're born. And this is why a lot of times alcoholics and drug addicts may easily relate to a stranger or to a professional rather than their own family members, because they've heard you so many times saying so many things, you are so inconsistent that they don't bother even take you on. And that frustration, I understand. Family members, they don't know what more to do to get this person's attention, because the person come straight up said, look, I don't want to hear. They just walk away on you. And then you should also avoid name calling, stupidity and this and that. And, we family members come up with these things, just to shame the person. No, you avoid that. And even professionals, people in the helping profession, I make it a point of duty to call people by their proper names. Not the drinking sobriquet. Bringing up the past repeatedly is another thing family members should avoid doing. Sending the person on guilt trips. And I know a lot of family members, they do this because they are hurting. And they will quickly remind you, remember when you hit me and you remember when you did this? Even outside of addiction, family members do this to each other in the hope of manipulating the person to get something or have some influence. It is always very useful to use calm tones. If you're angry, leave the discussion. Wait until you are in a good place in your mind where you can deal with it, because alcoholics and drug addicts will quickly, they have learned over the years to switch things over, and provoke you and send you on the guilt trip in reverse, make you feel it is your fault that they are doing what they're doing. And you can become irritated and and they get the better out of you. So you use I statements, not you. I feel bad, I feel hurt, I'm afraid this would happen and so on. Rather, you causing this and you causing that. And you must not make up stories, be specific. Look, when you go and drink, I can't go to sleep as a father or as a spouse. I can't, every time a car stop in front, I am worried it is the police or somebody coming to report that something has happened with you. These things take its toll on people eventually. Instead of saying you are ruining this family, you may want to say, look, I feel afraid when you come home intoxicated. When you speak like that, you lower the person's defensiveness, because they're not stupid, they are aware of what they're doing, and they're having difficulty to stop. They know they should. So the family needs to provide support without control. You don't want to control the person. You don't want to dominate their life. They don't want to appear like you're treating them like a little child again. You're supporting them, but you don't want to control their life. Addicts and alcoholics rebel against that kind of thing. They will find some way. They will not say anything, but in their mind, they will be going through conversations how to run a ring around you, how to teach you a lesson instead to prove that they are smarter than you. So that you cannot force recovery, but you can support meetings, going with them to meetings and things like that. You going to meetings as well. A lot of times, I've heard family members say, look, if he only stopped drinking, everything would be all right, not realizing what they have become in the process. They have become very dominant. They have been talking down to the person. They have cornered the family on their side, and he's isolated. The whole sociometrics of the family in that family group has changed. He has become the laughing stock and the scapegoat, and that has to change in recovery. It will take time. And what family members need to do, celebrate, even the little baby steps that the person is making, the small progress. And remember that sometimes relapse can become part of recovery. This is a disease where people can relapse. And not because they relapse, everything they learned before, they did before gets, obliterated from their mind. No, it's every relapse is an opportunity for them to learn where they went wrong or what they should have done at the time they were getting the urge and all of that. This is what I do in my practice here. When a person has relapsed, we do a post-mortem of it, where you were, what was going on, what was in your mind, what you failed to do, whether you spoke to somebody, whether you prayed and asked God to help you get over this urge, whether you kept your stomach filled, what were you doing? Whether you had prayed that morning about it. So it's a good time to review your relapse prevention strategies and whether they were being implemented and help the person to realize where they went wrong. So you encourage sponsorship as well. Let the person have a mentor. In AA, it is very, very useful to latch on to somebody who has been sober for a period of time and have experience in practicing the program. Encourage therapy if they are having to go to sessions. Keep an eye. Be aware that look, he's supposed to go to see his counselor on next week Tuesday. So you can remind him, hey, you remember you have to go to see your counseling. While first you want to see if they're ready and getting ready to go, fine. You don't belabor the point. But if you realize that look, they dilly-dallying around like they forgot, you remind them. So that programs such as Narcotics Anonymous, they provide peer support, Alcoholics Anonymous as well. And family members may attend open meetings to understand the process as well. And I know a lot of family members go and they said, look, they really, really appreciate now, they understand the disease. It's as though you're hearing it from the horse's mouth, as we say, when you go to a meeting. But remember, do not monitor every moment of the person's life. Nobody likes to feel smothered, especially when you had become accustomed to, you're an adult and you're accustomed to the freedom and so on. Recovery requires personal ownership. They need to take ownership of the recovery, and you need to step back and see if they are getting ready to go to the meeting, if they are staying out from their attitude towards the family get together and drinking, whether they express concerns and whether they are initiating discussion or coming forward and saying, dad or mom, I'm having the urge to take a drink today, or this is how I feel about it. And then again, family members need to consider what is called self-care, taking care of themselves, because family members often suffer with their own anxieties. Some of them may also suffer with depression, and in the process of taking care of the alcoholic or drug addict, a lot of them neglect their own welfare and their own health and become obsessed with monitoring and taking care of this person. And, you know, and there's something called codependency where you forget yourself and now you take over the responsibility of the other person. And that too is a kind of addiction. So that you must recover as well. And you can do this by attending Al Anon family groups or Naranon. These are family groups that will help you to understand what has happened. And you should also, if necessary, seek counseling. You know, join a support group yourself or seek spiritual guidance, medical help if you need as well. So, a healthy family creates a healthier recovery environment. Now, how family members should respond when a person relapses. And I will quickly go over this in the interest of time. Please, if your loved one relapse, do not panic. Because as I said earlier on, relapse is an opportunity for the person now to learn. Because a lot of people, take themselves for granted, take it for granted. No, I can do this now. I could go back online with my friends and they can't make me drink, and then realize it happens when they were advised that they should not be doing that. So do not panic. Do not feel ashamed. You didn't do anything wrong. Or say to the person that you'll never change. No, you should never do that. If you have to express those emotions, express it in another forum. Instead, reinforce treatment, reinforce boundaries, encourage immediate action. Do not wait, because sometimes a person could have what we call a slip by mistake under the pressure at the moment they went and took a drink. But if you do not attend to it right away, it can stay to become a full-blown relapse. And then every time a person relapses, if they don't go back into treatment right away, it becomes more and more difficult with every day they stay away from treatment or counseling or from their sessions, because they are going to start becoming more and more dependent, and then the body will go back again into what it used to be before. So that relapse is a warning sign, not a moral failure. But repeated relapse without consequences strengthens addiction. Person relapsing and you picking up, like I said before, and he vomit and you clean it and you call the office and make excuse for him and so on. So that when to step back. Family members, sometimes the hardest act of love is stepping back and allowing them to suffer the consequences. And that is, you need to step back if violence occurs. You know, whether drunk or sober, nobody has the right to become violent with you or aggressive. And if the stealing continues, in spite of all the treatment and all of that, then you may have to step back and allow them to suffer the consequences, especially if children are in danger. Now, you may need to seek the legal option. And if the mental health deteriorates, that is when you need to immediately have professionals coming. You have in Trinidad mental health officers and so on, because safety must come first. If you are not safe, you wouldn't be there to help them in the future anyhow. So you can love someone and still refuse to participate in their destruction. In conclusion, there's hope for families in that recovery is possible. And the worse a person gets, is the more they're likely to stop. Millions have recovered. Families that stop enabling, set boundaries, seek support, and practice self-care often see dramatic transformation. Addiction isolates, recovery reconnects. And remember, the goal is not just sobriety, the goal is healing the entire family system. So that if you need further assistance, please feel free. You can call me at 768-5925. Text me at that number or call 671-3040. As I said, this program is going to be posted on YouTube and Facebook soon after its completion this morning. I want to thank Radio and TV Jagriti for providing us airtime free of charge as a public service. I want to thank the people in the operating at the station, the technical operators, for facilitating this program every week. And I want to thank all of you for listening. Those of you who stayed with the program, thank you for listening. And please remember, recovery is possible, that nobody is so bad that they can't stop drinking or using drugs. So until next week, Thursday, I'm your host again, Ramnaresh Dwarika, thanking you for joining us this morning. And if you have any questions, of course, you can call the numbers on the screen. So thank you until next week, Thursday.